Hi guys, Laura here. Welcome back to my channel. I hope it's a great day where you are. It is not a great day here. It is pouring down rain. It's really drizzly and I'm really disappointed because there's almost no sunlight coming in my windows. So where I usually sit over in front of my bookshelves, it's really dark today and that just wasn't going to work. And I can't put this video off anymore. I've already put it off long enough and I need to get it filmed. So I decided instead I'm going to be sitting in front of my husband's bookshelves. Now, if you're somebody who likes to look at the backgrounds while you're watching these videos and see what books are on the shelves, you will notice my husband has completely different reading tastes than I do, so there are some definitely different titles back there. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my May wrap-up of the books that I read in May. And I didn't read a lot of books, but the books that I read were really good, and so now I thought I would share those with you. Let's get to the books. The first book I read in May was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And this is a book that I listened to on audiobook. This book is about a teenage girl. I think she's about 16. Her name is Star. She is a black girl who lives in this area called Garden Heights. And we're never really told, I don't think, what city it's in, but you get the impression it's some kind of mid to large size city. Star's family, her father owns a grocery store and her mother is a nurse, and they have decided to send their children to the other side of town to a private school that is primarily white. And so Star has to bridge these two worlds between living in this Garden Heights neighborhood, but then going to the other side of town, which I think they said is like a 45-minute ride to get to school each day, and then the friends that she has at school. And so she has kind of become like a chameleon where she has learned how to adapt to each of the different environments, and she says she's two different people when she's in each of those places, and that becomes really important for her as she tries to figure out exactly who she is. But the story that we follow is when she is on spring break and she's at Garden Heights, she goes to a house party with a lot of the teenagers that still go to school there in Garden Heights. And she feels, the one thing about her situation is she feels kind of out of place in both places. While she's at this party, she doesn't know a lot of the people because she doesn't go to school with them, but she runs into a boy named Khalil. Now, Khalil was a friend of hers from way back. When she was about 3 years old, her mother sent her to a neighbor lady's house to babysit her while she went to school, and then she became a nurse and went to work. So Star grew up from the age of 3 staying in this woman's house, and this woman had a grandson who was Khalil, which is about the same age as Star. So the two of them became friends, and they basically grew up together, and they played together all the time when they were young, and they shared all kinds of things, and so they were really close. And Star is now 16 and she goes to this private school, and then Khalil is around the same age, but he stayed and he's going to school in Garden Heights. And so they've kind of lost touch over the last couple of years. They haven't spoken to each other very much, but at this party they reconnect and they have this good conversation, but then a fight breaks out. It doesn't have anything to do with the two of them. It's in another area of the house, but shots are fired and they realize they need to get out of there. So they run out to his car and he says, I'll give you a ride home. So he's going to take her home. And because they haven't seen each other for a while, they take kind of a long way home so they have a chance to talk. But they go through this neighborhood that's a street that's really deserted. There are no lights on there, no people out. And when they're there, they get pulled over by a police officer. Now, they weren't doing anything. I don't remember if it was they were pulled over because of a tail light that was out or something minor like that. The officers approach the car and question Khalil, and basically, make a long story short, when Khalil gets out of the car, the police officer shoots Khalil 3 times in the back and kills him. And Star witnesses the entire thing. And that's not really giving away a spoiler. That happens toward the beginning of the book. And then the rest of the book, we follow how Star deals with what she has seen, what she's experienced, not just absorbing what all happened and processing that, but then she also has to deal with the media fallout and the investigation and everything that comes after the shooting. And it becomes a big news event, and then people find out, and it's just a huge as you can imagine, a huge story. And it was really interesting. Some books that at the end of the book, I am just an emotional wreck. And this is one of them. I was in the car and I was just weeping at the end of this book. It is so well written, and this was really an incredible book. I gave it 5 stars, and it was worth every one of them. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it already, definitely read it. I'm going to now see if I can get a hold of the movie and watch that, because I haven't seen that yet. The second book I read in May is The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. Now, this book is a book that really resonated with me on a personal level. I listened to the audiobook version of this as well. This book is a story. It starts in 1985-1986 in Chicago, and it is about a group of friends who are mostly gay men, and one of them, there is also the sister of one of the men. Toward the beginning of the book, one of the boys, Nico, dies as a result of AIDS. This takes place at a time when AIDS has been around for a couple of years, but they haven't really understood exactly what it is. But it is devastating the gay community because people are getting sick and dying left and right. People are losing large groups of friends almost overnight, and they're panicking, and it's just a terrifying time. And I really connected with this too because I was a freshman in college in 1985 and 86, and I lived in a dorm where there was a large group of gay men, and I became friends with them, and I saw firsthand how terrified these people were that their community was being ravaged by this disease that they didn't really understand. The president wouldn't even acknowledge it. It was just this horrifying thing that was happening to these people. And this story starts with a group in Chicago, these young men, and follows through their trials with this disease and how it affects their group. And some of them get sick, some of them don't. Some of them die, some of them don't. I'm not going to say who because I don't want to give any spoilers. And then there's also the sister who is part of this group, and she basically she's not just watches, she's a part of this whole calamity that's happening. And then we also, in this book, we also fast forward to, I think it's 2016. It's a more contemporary time, and the sister's name is Fiona. So Fiona has a daughter, and they are estranged. The daughter, whose name is Claire, has taken off and disappeared, and Fiona doesn't know where she is. So Fiona basically ends up going to Paris to see if she can track down her daughter. And these two stories go back and forth. One of the things that I think this book is really good about showing is just how much of an impact this deadly disease had on all kinds of people. Not only did it affect the people who became sick and many died, it also affected the people who survived, who were left behind. I don't think Fiona ever really gets over losing not only her brother, but many of her best friends at a very early age. It affected who she became, and I think that becomes apparent when we see the relationship that she has with her daughter in the current time. This was an amazing book. This is another one that had me weeping at the end. There was a lot of weeping this month. I would definitely recommend it, 5 stars. The next book I read is Inheritance by Dani Shapiro. See if I can get the glare off of this one. This book was originally published, I believe, in January of 2019. This is a memoir written by Dani Shapiro, who she is a writer, and she's written several things before, but this is a story of her own experience. She used one of the DNA testing kits that you can get. You basically spit in a test tube, and then you mail it off to a company, and they will analyze your DNA and basically come back with a report, basically give you a breakdown of your ancestors, where they were from. In the case of Dani Shapiro, she was raised as a pretty devout Jew, and both of her parents and her grandparents on both sides, everyone had been Jewish. And the one thing that she pointed out that it was always strange in her life is that, if you know, a lot of people with Ashkenazi Jewish heritage have dark hair and dark eyes. Dani Shapiro, if you can see on the back of her book, she's got blonde hair and blue eyes. And so people were always commenting on the fact that she really didn't look Jewish, for what that's worth. Basically what happens, and this isn't giving away too much, I don't think, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but she finds out that when her results come back, her results show that she's about like 50% Ashkenazi Jew and 50% Northern European. I'm not sure if it's German or British, but it's definitely not Jewish. And she doesn't understand that because, like I said, both of her parents are Jewish and all of her grandparents. So she really expected to get a result that showed almost 100% Ashkenazi Jew. She basically figures out that the man who she knew as her father was not her biological father. She feels like she wants to find out, first of all, what happened? How could this possibly be the case? And secondly, she wants to find out who is her actual biological father. And it was very interesting to me. There were a couple of things about this that kind of struck me, that irritated me, really. The first one was she found the results of her DNA test on a certain day, and basically within like 48 hours or so, she had already supposedly found the name of who her real father was. Now, I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's not the truth. I just know that when I do genealogy research, and I know that when you're tracking down somebody, it's not that easy. It takes a long time. And for her to say that she found this man, and she didn't even know the circumstances prior to that fast, that seemed really strange to me. And I was really caught off guard when she said that. And I don't know if it was, it does make the story flow very quickly, but I just didn't seem realistic to me. The second thing was she spent a lot of time worrying over the fact that the father that she knew was not her biological father, and that somebody else was. And while I understand, I haven't been through that myself, so it's hard for me to know what I would feel like in that situation. But at a certain point, I started feeling like whether you shared his DNA or not, he was still your father. And I just felt like she wasn't really recognizing that and honoring that. And I had trouble understanding why she was making such a big deal about it. I kept thinking of all the people who are adopted or who, for some reason, are raised by people who are not their biological parent, and they develop close relationships with these people and that have a meaningful impact for their whole lives, even though they don't share DNA. And I have trouble seeing that it really matters. I think it's more important the person who is in your life that raises you. And so I kind of had a problem with that. But again, I'm not in her situation, and I don't know her background. Maybe her upbringing was such that it was, I think that the Jewish people in particular seem to have a really important idea of inheritance and staying within the religion and passing down their traditions. And so maybe that's the issue, that it's harder for her to let go because of that. Anyway, it was still a really good book. I really enjoyed reading it, and it was so fun to read about somebody else doing a DNA test. And I did this myself, although mine was a relatively, it was kind of a boring story because there was no drama that occurred as a result of my test, but it was just really neat to see what happened when somebody else did a test and found out. I gave this book 4 stars. It was really good. Not quite a 5, but it was a 4. The next book I read in May was Summer Wives by Beatrice Williams. This one came out, I think, last year. And I will admit that it was the cover that totally sold me on this one. Even though it's just a simple photo, it just captures it so well. It really drew me in. Basically, this is a story that takes place in an island in Long Island Sound, I believe. I think it's a fictional island, but it's based on a real island, which I think is right off the coast of Connecticut, between New York and Connecticut. And it starts in the 1950s. And on this island, there are people who live there year round, which I think are mostly of Portuguese descent. And they basically run the island. They run the grocery store, all the little shops. There are lobster fishermen. There is a lighthouse. And so there's the people who run the lighthouse. Those people are there all year. And they're kind of lower to middle class working people. And then there are also these really large estates on the island. And the wealthy people, mostly white, come from the city in the summertime and live in their big estates. And there's a country club and everything. It kind of had that part of it had a Dirty Dancing vibe for me, because it was in the 50s and these wealthy people were going to spend their summer where it was nice and summery. The main character is Miranda, and when we first meet her, she, I think, is like 15 years old. Her father was killed in World War II, so it's just she and her mother. And basically, her mother is remarrying one of the wealthy men who has a summer home on the island. So they are going for the summer to this island where they're going to have the wedding. And then after the wedding, her mother and her new husband are going to get in his yacht and go off for a month-long honeymoon. And basically leave Miranda there in the house on the island. And she's not alone. She's there with Isabel, who is her new stepsister. And then of course they have people in the house, the servants. So basically we experience Miranda going to this island, meeting all these people for the first time, and then her mom and her new stepdad leaving. And so she spends the summer there with Isabel, or Izzy, getting to know the people of the island. She also meets Joseph, who is the son of the lighthouse keeper, and he's also a lobster fisherman, but he's about their same age, a little bit older. And they develop this relationship. Now, when the book starts, we meet Miranda many years later at the end of the 1960s, and she is on a ferry on her way back over to the island, and she hasn't been there since that summer in the early 1950s. And basically she hasn't spoken to her mother since then. And we learn fairly early on that there's something that happened that summer that was very devastating. Joseph, the boy that she met, had been put in prison, and he has now escaped from prison, and nobody knows where he is. And Miranda's going back to the island, and we don't know if she's going back because of him or if she's going back for another reason. But basically she goes and she reunites with her mom in the house, and the story unfolds, and we flip back and forth between these two time periods from the 1950s and the late 1960s to discover what happened. There was a murder that took place in that summer in the 1950s, and we don't know who it is or why it happened at first, but gradually as the story comes out, we discover what's happening. And I have to say, I love this book because the plot, the way it was woven in and out, and the way the story was told, I really enjoyed it. It was very fun, and it kept my interest. It was a page turner, and I didn't figure it out, which is a really good sign. There was a secret that had been kept, and I did kind of figure that out before it was revealed. But the murder, who did the murder, I did not figure that out until it was actually revealed, and it was really well done. The other thing that I really liked about this book is the setting, because it just really felt like an island in the summer, and I could see the lighthouse and the beach, and I could hear the seagulls flying over, and the rhythmic sloshing of the water against the sides of the boat, and all those sorts of things that really make you think of summer on an island with beaches. And I found myself, after the book was over, after I was finished reading it, I kept thinking about that place and wanting to go back and visit that place again. So I just absolutely fell in love with it. I had never read Beatrice Williams before, but I decided to go back and pick up her backlist titles and read those as well. See if they transport me the way this book did. I gave it 5 stars. The 5th book that I read this month was She Walks These Hills by Sharon McCrum. And this was a book that I listened to the audiobook with my husband in the car. And this is actually a book that he chose. we try to listen to audiobooks together in the car, and a lot of times he'll pick the book, so it's not something I may have picked up on my own. And the reason he picked it up is, well, a couple of reasons. He's really into mysteries, especially if there's like a supernatural element to it. And then also he was interested in the setting, which is in an Appalachian town. In this case, it was in a town in eastern Tennessee, and his family is from eastern Kentucky, in that Appalachian region. And so it was an area that he was really interested in finding out about. And so we found Sharon McCrumb's books. This book is actually number 3 of a series called Ballad Series. And we just stumbled upon that one, so we probably need to go back and get the other books in the series now. This book, I already mentioned, it takes place in an eastern Tennessee town. It's a small town where everybody knows everybody else. There is the sheriff, which I think his name is Spencer Arrowwood, and there's a deputy named LaDunn, and then there's a woman named Martha who she is an office worker in the sheriff's office, but she basically talks them into letting her become a deputy because they're shorthanded, they need another person. So she becomes a deputy as well. And I will just say, she is my favorite character in this book. I don't think she's necessarily intended to be, but she is my favorite character. So there's that, is the basis of the town. And what we're following is, there is a man named Harm Sorley. The story is, Harm Sorley in the 1960s was sent to prison for killing his neighbor. And this was in another he was sent to the penitentiary, wherever that is, and he'd been there for I think 30 years. Well, now Harm has escaped, and nobody knows where he is, but the authorities believe he's on his way back to his hometown, where they don't know what he will do when he gets back. So they're all looking for him, but they can't find him anywhere. There's a lot of wilderness and uncharted territory in this region, and so they believe he might be hiking through the woods, making his way back. There's also a secondary storyline where there is a college professor who has been studying the story of something that happened, I think in the 1800s, where this woman was captured by a native tribe and taken away from her people, and then she managed to escape and made her way back by foot over many, many miles. And now there's this legend that she haunts the hills, she walks the hills, and I think that's where the title comes from. And so he has decided, in order to do his research to find out what that would have been like, he decides to take the trail that she took when she escaped and went back to the town. And so he is hiking, and the thing with him is he is not of the woods. He has no idea what he's doing with hiking. He doesn't know how to be prepared. When he packs, he takes things that are completely ridiculous and just weigh him down. And it's kind of interesting to see that, because he's so inept when it comes to hiking in these very wild woods. And at first, I have to say, we thought, I'm not really sure, even now I'm not 100% sure if his storyline was necessary to the final story as it played out. I wonder if it could have been written in a way without that side of it. But it does weave in toward the end of the book. It does all come together. But that was the one reservation that I had about the book, that I wasn't quite sure if that made sense. It's all, another good thing about this, and I think this speaks to the fact that it's part of a series, is we get to see the relationship between Martha and LaDunn and the Sheriff Arrowwood. Obviously, it's a thing that's going to play out over several books, and so they have a history, and I'm sure something is going to happen in the next book that has to do with the interactions between them, and that is something that I'm also really interested in. Really enjoyed this book. I love the flavor of Appalachia that we get from this, and I'm looking forward to reading other books in this series. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. All right, so those are the books that I read in May. I had one book that I DNF'd in the month of May, and that was The Paragon Hotel. Now, I hesitate to say I DNF'd it, because DNF kind of implies that I'm not going to pick it up again, but I don't want to say I did not finish it, because I might finish it in the future. I haven't decided. It is really a situation where it was an audiobook that I got from the library, and it was due back at the library, and I was going to have to give it up, and I was only like 43% in. There was no way I was going to be able to finish it before it was due, and so I just decided to stop listening to it, let it go back to the library. Now, it's very possible I might go back later and get it and finish it, because it's not a bad story. I was just finding it kind of, it was moving kind of slow, and I felt like, okay, after we got everything established, we know who the characters are and what everything is, then it wasn't really moving after that much, and I needed something to happen. I needed something to move forward, and maybe I was really close to that happening. I was 43% in, but based on the fact that it wasn't really going anywhere and I had other books to read, I decided not to finish it at the time. That's it for the books that I read in May. It was a really good month. If you noticed, I had, of the 5 books that I read, 3 of them were 5 stars and 2 were 4 stars. So overall, it was a really good month. And I do think that sometimes I rate things pretty highly. The reason for that is, if I feel like a book is going to be less than 3 stars, I don't read it. I'll DNF it before it gets to that point, and then I don't rate books if I DNF them, because I don't feel like that's fair. I feel like you need to finish a book to give it a rating. So all of my ratings are 3 stars or above. So pretty good month. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, how you feel about them. If there are any other books in the series that I mentioned that you think I should read, let me know. That's it for me this time. If you like this video, be sure to like it. Also, comment and let me know what your thoughts are. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.